Hello and welcome to the State of the Fleet Market, a weekly video series produced by Automotive Fleet magazine. I'm Mike Antich, editor of Automotive Fleet, and today I'd like to discuss what's occurring in the commercial fleet market for the week of August 17th, 2020. And one of the nice things about being in this position is it puts you in contact with a lot of different fleet managers and many different industries where anecdotally you get a good feel as to the state and direction of the broader economy as to what's happening. And what I hear from a lot of fleet managers that I talk to is that many of their companies have gotten leaner during this pandemic. In some cases, the cuts have been pretty dramatic, with entire layers of middle management being eliminated. And where you primarily saw this was during the shutdown period. As company revenues declined because of the shutdown, a lot of them implemented downsizing initiatives that carried over into the fleet side of the business, and this was especially the case with companies that were deemed non-essential by the government. And where it primarily impacted these companies was in the area of employee attrition, layoffs, and furloughs. And during this period, employees were furloughed. They were brought back into the company, and in many cases re-furloughed all over again. And one of the things that I continually hear from fleet managers in more frequency now is this topic of potential budget cuts. And I've been hearing this for a while now, going back to the April, May, June time frame. And this was reinforced in not only anecdotal information but surveys that we've done. But what I hear from fleet managers is that there are discussions now within their companies, and the way it's being framed to them by their management is that in order to avoid making additional layoffs or furloughs, there need to be additional cuts across the entire enterprise. And this is being discussed with fleet managers. It's also being discussed with other departmental managers. But as a fleet manager, you've been running a pretty lean operation, and there's not too many of us where we have a lot of fat in our budgets. And they're thinking, well, where do I make these cuts? And how do I make these cuts? And as I mentioned earlier, this was also reinforced by surveys that we've done, and our latest one, which was completed on July 31st, shows that only 1 out of 3 fleet managers actually feel confident that their budgets are going to remain intact for this calendar year. 43% feel that there's a strong possibility that their budgets could be cut. And when we asked them to guesstimate what those cuts might be, the largest percentage said in that 10 percentile range. But if these budget cuts are mandated, and I want to stress that this is just conversation internal to companies, although some budget cuts have been implemented, but for the most part it's conversation. And as I talk to fleet managers, I go, where exactly might you be making cuts in order to accomplish some of these budget reductions? And a common area that fleet managers are looking in order to save money is in the area of their sustainability budgets. And that is a big topic of conversation as to where money can be saved without having a dramatic impact on the current fleet operations that are in place. But a lot of this is going to be influenced by how fast the economy improves and how quickly their individual businesses improve. And what's really critical is the fact that the lion's share of US GDP is based on consumer spending. So consumer confidence is going to be really critical in order to have a strong recovery, which will carry over to these individual companies. So that's really the linchpin as to whether these future budget cuts will come into play, and it's going to be based on the strength of the economic recovery. So as you know from my past State of the Fleet industry reports, I like to examine actual data versus having someone interpret the data for me. And this goes back to my college years. My professors always stressed to me the importance of actually going to the source document in order to assess what is actually happening versus reading written interpretations of someone else telling you what happened. And if you just look at the data, and that's important, just look at the data, don't worry about other people's interpretations. There continue to be many positive signs that the economy is emerging from our self-induced shutdown. So there weren't any sort of flaws within the economy that caused these problems. It was our decision, in order to stop the pandemic, to close down the industry. So the fundamentals are still right, they're still in place, and if you look at the data that's emerging, let's look first at job creation or restoration, as I mentioned. In 3 months, May, June, and July, the economy added or restored 9.3 million jobs. That's a staggering number, but it's also reflective of how staggering the job decline was. That 3-month period, adding 1 million plus new jobs per month, represents the single greatest job creation period in the history of the American economy. And this is, again, going back to the source materials. This is based on data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And as you can see from the chart that's being shown here, in green, it shows where we have the month-by-month job increases. And it shows that in 3 months, 42% of all the jobs that were lost due to the shutdown of the economy that really triggered on March 11th on, they've been recovered by the end of July. Now this is just a 3-month snapshot in time, but it does represent the fastest economic recovery in American history. So, over a 3-month period, a very dramatic recovery. We don't know what's going to be happening the next quarter, 3 months, but in terms of trajectory, it's in the right direction. Here's some other data to consider. Factory output continues to increase, and it was up for 3.4% in the month of July. Now this is the 3rd consecutive month where there have been increases in factory output, and it kind of parallels what's happening with the job restoration, job creation numbers that we're seeing. June, it was even greater, the month prior, with factory output increasing 5.7%. And again, this is Federal Reserve data, again, going back to the source. Factory utilization and capacity is now almost up to 70%. Another data point is in terms of retail sales. Retail sales, again, going back to this 3-month period, that's been increasing each 3 months. Now there is some concern here, and the concern is about future growth, and that's especially if a compromise can't be reached in regards to this proposed stimulus program, which is currently deadlocked in Congress and the executive branch. But nonetheless, retail sales have been up for the past 3 months. We're also seeing that in retail auto sales. Those continue to be strong. We've been covering that on a week-by-week basis here. Likewise, used car sales continue to be strong, and prices are hitting record levels, as is shown in this chart here. Not only has it been recovered on the used car side, but also on the new car side. And those are some pretty dramatic numbers that we're seeing in terms of this recovery. The other interesting thing is nobody was predicting these things. That's one of the things that I stressed in past State of the Fleet Industry reports, is that all of these reports that have come out have exceeded expectations. And why is that? And I think a good reason why these reports have exceeded the initial forecasts of economists and analysts is because many companies during this period have stopped giving forward guidance. We covered this in last week's report. Companies are really reluctant to say what their business is going to be like in the coming quarters. And the reason for that is they don't know. So without this forward guidance, many people are not having the full picture to look at when making their forecasts, or those companies that they are getting forward guidance from are companies whose financial positions may be more precarious and thereby skewing downward forecasts and results. But let's look at some other fundamentals. And this we see in our everyday lives. Fuel prices continue to be low. The national average now for a gallon of unleaded gasoline is $2.17. Fuel is really what drives the fleet industry. If fuel prices are high, it's a drag on overall fleet business. But prices have remained low, and they've been remaining low now for a long period of time. Another area is construction is booming. And as I mentioned in past events, construction is really critical to the fleet industry. It's that bellwether that shows where the market is going in terms of pickup sales, trucks, and vans. Construction is one of the largest buyers of fleet vehicles. And during the period from May, June, and July, this 3-month period that I keep on referencing here, over 693,000 new construction jobs were created. Another area to look at in terms of fundamentals, and we see it around us, the real estate market, if you haven't been looking, it's burning hot. Prices are rising. Properties are not staying on the market for very long. And part of what's driving this is the interest rates. Interest rates for mortgages, and not only mortgages, but also for cars, are extremely low, and that's helping to drive a lot of these sales. So this is my analysis of the glass half full. But, you need to be objective about it. There is another way where you can look at things and see the glass as half empty. We're in a deep hole. As early as July, as recently as early July, there have been 30.2 million Americans who are still receiving unemployment checks. It's a staggering number. It's a sobering number. It's a Depression-era number. But nonetheless, as we've looked at the numbers, the data, going back to the data shows the recovery moving in the right direction. We're not in the business of predicting the future, but if you look at a snapshot in time in terms of the trajectories, those numbers are moving in the right way. So what could cause the glass to be half full? There could be a second wave of the COVID-19 infections in the fall. With the signing of the USMCA agreement, the old NAFTA, a revised version of NAFTA, Mexico is now an integrated part of the automotive supply chain. Now, Mexico is likewise going through its own COVID-19 crisis. It's not in parallel with the U.S. They've received it later than us. There are concerns about whether slowdowns in Mexico could be impacting the overall automotive supply chains. That's yet to be seen. The other areas in the oil and gas business, as we've discussed this repeatedly, those industries continue to struggle. They're not going to be contributing to the fleet recovery. In fact, if anything, if you look at overall sales, they'll be impacting it negatively, since a lot of those companies have decided not to be replacing vehicles, or only to replace what has to be replaced, and most of them are going through downsizing. And it will be a drag on the overall cumulative sales. The other question mark is pent-up demand. During the economic shutdown, there was a lot of pent-up demand there that we've seen being manifested on the retail side of the business, seen manifested in terms of new car, used car sales. Is that pent-up demand been pretty much used up? Is it going to start to wane? So that will be seen in future numbers. And another thing is, something on a personal level is, we're seeing bad things happen to people we know, that you and I know. I'm a big believer in LinkedIn, and I make LinkedIn just strictly devoted to the fleet industry. Everyone that I'm connected to on fleet is related to fleet. I don't have my brother on there. I don't have relatives. I don't have colleagues that work on LinkedIn. It's just strictly fleet. And at the moment, I'm shy of just 8,000 LinkedIn connections. So as a result of that, is when I'm going through my daily feeds, and it's starting to take up more and more of my day going through that, but you're starting to see where people are losing their positions. These are people who were good at their jobs. And even despite this, they're continuing and unable to avoid these cuts. So that is kind of sobering. It's a little bit depressing in a way, and it really brings home the magnitude of some of the changes that are happening. But nonetheless, despite all of these negative things that we could focus on, I'm really an optimist at heart, and my personal assessment is that our glass is half full. There is an economic recovery that's happening. You see it in the data, and the question is, how long will it continue, and is it continuing to be fast enough? So with that, the numbers will prove this out one way or another. We're going to continue to follow the data in our coming State of the Fleet Industry reports. And until we meet again next week, next Monday, this concludes my State of the Fleet Industry presentation for the week of August 17th. So thank you for listening.